Hey there, vinyl community. I'm shooting this today from my new listening room in Los Angeles, California, which I moved to about 2 months ago. And I'm getting over COVID, so I thought what a good time to shoot a video and talk about a little pet project or a little interest I've been having lately in mono records and mono vinyl reproduction. Depending on how much of a purist you are, mono records and reproducing mono signal in your stereo or on your hi-fi is a whole can of worms, and there's a lot of different rabbit holes you can go down. I know people that have separate mono setups. I know people that have separate analog chains for their mono systems. I know people that have just separate turntables for mono. But there's certain limitations to that. Eventually, you start to realize you could spend a good chunk of money just adding mono to your system, and how much of that is worth it. Would you rather have two separate moderately priced systems or one single high priced system? What would you rather put your money into? So that's something I've always kind of grappled with. In the past I've had a preamplifier that had a mono switch. I had my old Macintosh C117, I think that was the model name, preamplifier that luckily enough did have a mono switch on it. And most of my mono records were modern cut mono records, records that were cut with a stereo lathe. There is a bit of a difference between mono records that were cut in the 50s and the 60s and mono records that were cut, starting in the mid 60s with a stereo lathe. That the groove actually does look a little bit different, slightly different width to the groove. And so, the quality difference of playing back a mono record pressed in the 2010s on a stereo cartridge and playing back a mono record pressed in the 1950s on a stereo cartridge is drastically different. So what's the problem with playing back mono records on a stereo cartridge in a stereo setup? One of the key problems with a stereo cartridge is that you are reading back both vertical and lateral groove information. And that's perfect on a stereo record, because on a stereo record you have both vertical and lateral groove information, but on a mono cartridge the only information is in lateral information. Anything vertical is going to be just noise that the cartridge is picking up. So what happens often when you play back a mono record on a stereo cartridge is that you get a much higher noise floor, and also you get some out-of-phase information that the cartridge is picking up, because you have differences between the mono signal in the left channel and the right channel. So essentially you're getting a slightly different image in both channels of what is the same information. In the past I was really happy with just having a mono button on my old Macintosh preamp, but I don't have that equipment anymore. My Hagel amplifier does not have a mono, any type of easy way to switch it to mono. And lots of phono preamplifiers do have mono switches, but my lovely Alnic H1202 does not have a mono switch on it, unfortunately. I really wish it did, because then it would be the perfect phono preamp. As I started to realize I wasn't playing my mono records because of this, I thought about possible solutions, and I wanted to fool around with how good mono playback can go. At my family's house, we have a Technics 1200, and the reality of a detachable head shell makes it really, really easy to swap cartridges. So earlier this summer, I had the opportunity to try a cartridge by Audio-Technica called the AT33 Mono. This cartridge is only $299, which in the realm of low output moving coils is actually pretty reasonable. I mean, a lot of people that are into moving coil playback are used to spending more than $1,000 on a cartridge. So the AT33 Mono is low output moving coil. It loads pretty much exactly the same as a number of other low output moving coils that you're going to be used to. It's very comfortable at 100 ohms. So it fit into that system perfectly. And what I found using that $299 cartridge is it blew away playing mono records on the other cart we normally had on that table, which was the Dynavector 20X2 low output. There was no comparison in playback. Everything was tighter, there was much more bass, everything was focused, and there was a much, much lower noise floor. So I was really happy with that, but then I thought about my own setup, and the fact that I don't have a detachable head shell. You know, I love my acoustic signature tone arm, but it does not make changing cartridges easy. When I change cartridges, that's an hour to 2 hour affair. You know, just dialing it in just right. And, you know, it wasn't worth it for me to switch back and forth. So what could I do? Well, you know, my setup did not have a piece of equipment that had a mono switch in it, but you can put in a mono switch in your setup, either in some cases before it reaches the phono preamp or after the phono preamp. And I happen to find a solution, because I'm a member over at the Hoffman forums, that there is a seller there that's become quite well known for making mono switches. So I bought this guy right here, my very own custom built mono switch. It takes a stereo signal from, in this case, my phono preamp, and converts it. It combines the channels and cancels out the out of phase information, and combines the channels into a single monophonic signal, and feeds that single mono signal to both channels of my amplifier. And I will say, it didn't make as big of a difference as going to a full mono cartridge. A mono switch never will. However, this has let me enjoy my mono records again in a way I just wasn't before. And the best part about this thing is that this was $85 shipped. So if you're interested in buying a mono switch, there's a lot of sellers on eBay and just kind of around that make these mono switches. And I don't know of a company that outright sells them in a commercial form. Maybe there are companies that do that. I'm just not really aware of them. But if you're interested in getting one of the mono switches that I bought, this was $85 shipped, and it was the most expensive version he makes. A guy in the Hoffman forums by the name of Xmas111 has been making these for a number of years, and I know Steve Hoffman himself has bought one and uses one in his system. So if you're interested in purchasing one of these from John, I believe the fellow's name is John, I will put his email down in the description. I've contacted him, and he's given me the okay to do that. So if you'd like to buy one of these mono switches and try it in your setup, send him an email, and I think he has options anywhere from about $50 to $85 for depending on the design of the mono switches. One thing I will say is that I got what looked like the biggest and heaviest case, because the smaller switches, the cheaper switches, one of the problems is that the cables are heavier than the switch, and so it's hard to get the switch to sit on your rack. So I went with the bigger, bulkier design, because it's, I can set it on my rack and it's not going to be moved around by the cables. So having the mono switch in my system has led me to appreciate a lot of my mono records again, both my my modern reissues cut with a stereo lathe, and older mono records cut with a mono cutting lathe. In particular, I've really been enjoying the Analog Productions Beach Boys reissues that I bought a couple years ago, but had kind of stopped listening to for a while. But now they're sounding really, really good. The noise floor is reduced. The bass is much better. A lot of that kind of weird, off in the distant phase information you would sometimes get playing these mono records back on a stereo card, the mono switch has cut that off. I will say the difference, though, on older records is much, much bigger than the difference on these records. But I do want to show these off. Here's Smiley Smile in mono, Analog Productions. Pet Sounds. I do prefer the stereo AP Pet Sounds, but this Mono 33 also sounds amazing. And I kind of go back and forth between the two. Here's Summer Days and Summer Nights. And Surfin' USA. This sounds really, really good. I was shocked how good the sound was on this. I've also been enjoying some of the Sundays mono reissues. Here is the much sought after mono Sundays Moby Grape, the one that was out for a month before the photographer sued Sundays, or threatened to sue them. Here's an excellent sounding Kevin Gray cut of Donovan, Where Your Love Like Heaven. Probably my favorite Donovan record. And of course, the favorites. You got the Beatles Mono Masters here. And the newly repressed, sorry it's heavy, Rolling Stones in mono. Just sounding great, summing up the stereo channels into mono on my system. But I've also been experimenting with older classical mono releases, because you can get these records very, very cheap. Often, you're finding really, really high quality 50s and 60s classical mono records in the dollar bin. I just wanted to show off one I recently got. This is Maria Callas at La Scala. This is an Angel Records release. However, a couple of the original Angel Records pressings, I in my videos I constantly talk about how the US Angel Records releases were really, really bad sounding because they were cut in the US using inferior equipment. But a few of the old mono releases, even though they are US Angels, are pressed in England. And those are the ones you want to find. And so this Angel Records right here I have, let me get it out of the sleeve, is a made in England version. And listening to this with the mono switch engaged is really amazing. It's a really amazing sounding recording. And of course, Maria Callas is, one of those artists that comes around once in a generation. We're lucky we have anything recorded from her, let alone these great. She has a few stereo recordings, but most of her output was in the mono era. So if you're a record collector and someone significantly involved in the setup of your stereo, I would highly recommend playing around with your different options for mono playback that isn't just playing back mono records on your stereo setup. You can either experiment, some of you have equipment that has mono switches on it, and in that case you're very lucky. But if not, I would highly recommend looking into a mono switch like this that can just be switched on and off. And obviously, introducing any new part of the signal into your system is gonna come with some downsides. But I haven't really noticed any signal degradation after introducing this very, very simple box into my system. It was annoying that I had to put in one more pair of RCA leads into my system. I don't like adding another step, but I think the reward for being able to switch between stereo and mono easily was worth it. And so I would recommend looking into something like this. And if you want to buy one of these from John, again, his email is down in the description. But for those with a second turntable lying around, or for those with a detachable head shell, I would highly recommend also looking into a mono cartridge. And I personally vouch for the AT33 mono. I think you cannot find better sound in mono for $299. I mean, that's I think the Ortofon 2M mono, which is a moving magnet card, is around that price. I think the Ortofon 2M mono is like 200 something. For $299, $300, you can get a low output moving coil cartridge that just sounds incredible. It has the right kind of stylus for playing those old mono records, a conical stylus. So if you have the ability, if you either have a phono preamp that has two inputs where you can put a second turntable in and just have like a mono turntable, or if you have a detachable head shell on your turntable, if you have like a Technics style tone arm where you can detach the head shell and put another head shell on, it might be worth it to have a mono cart sitting on a head shell there that you can change out very easily. But whatever your route is, I think there's ways to really get the best out of mono records and realize that a lot of these recordings sound really, really good. Hi-fi didn't just come about in the stereo area; it was already there with mono records, and I think a lot of record collectors are starting to appreciate mono recordings a lot more now. And of course, the demand is there because there's lots of records now being reissued in mono, done really, really well by the likes of people like Kevin Gray and Ryan Smith and Bernie Grunman and things like that. So I think, as time goes on, we're going to see more and more mono reissues, is like we have in the last 10 years. And I hope that the resurgence in mono records leads people to kind of experiment with their hi-fi setup and figure out ways to play back mono in a way that gets them better results sonically. So that's been my journey through mono. Tell me down in the comments what your experience with some of this mono stuff is, what equipment you use, what your method has been in integrating mono into your stereo hi-fi setup. Let me know in the description, and I will see you guys next time. Cheers.